Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Tom Slivick with Supervisor John Plasse here in the 1st District in Amador County. We're talking about the Wild and Scenic Designation, possibly from the state, of the Mokelumne River. And Mr. Plasse, you've been telling me, John, that you don't have much time. I believe it's the 29th is when this is going to be heard, this bill in the...
In subcommittee, correct.
Okay, in subcommittee. All right. Now, it would seem to me that whenever I've heard of water issues here in the county, I've heard a lot of screaming and kicking of basically people saying, we don't want San Francisco stealing our water. They're, where they're taking our water. They're ice for our water. And does this seem like that to you?
Well, it's interesting to me, Tom, that I agree with your point that we're frequently, East Bay mud is frequently held up before us as the boogeyman that's going to come take our excess water and build dams on our rivers and so forth, although I don't believe any of the dams below Highway 49 that have, or above Highway 49, excuse me, that have been proposed in the past have come from East Bay mud. They're actually local proposals.
But I think it's the idea that somehow if we don't use the water, it's going to go to San Francisco.
Which is exactly the net effect that a wild and scenic designation on our river would have, because it transfers all authority as to the utilization of Amador's water right and any excess water flows that the Mokelumne has in wet weather years, transfers all that authority to the Secretary of Resources Agency at the state level for that person, that appointed, unelected bureaucrat, to make the sole determination as to whether there is a need in Amador County for domestic water use. Doesn't allow us to utilize that water for maybe ag resources in our area, whether it be additional vineyard operations or other agricultural operations, send some of that water to Jackson Valley Irrigation District so that they could use it in that prime farmland down there. It strips us of that opportunity.
So is the board looking at this from looking out for the future? Is that?
I think very much so. I mean, I think we're concerned about the present too, and again, the creation of this boogeyman that somehow it's going to compromise our river access, or Wild and Scenic is going to increase river access. It does none of those things. The river access is what it is. As one of our speakers, a private property owner on the river yesterday stated, the river is what it is. Wild and Scenic is touted as being something that protects the free-flowing condition of a river, and he offered up a definition of free-flowing river as something that is a river that flows unimpeded from its source to either its mouth with the coastline or to the confluence of another major river. The Mokelumne River is dammed and diverted and hydropowered up and down the stretches of the Mokelumne River. Does not begin to meet the definition really of free-flowing, and yet California Wild and Scenic Designation requires that a study as to the suitability of the river be done by the Secretary of the Resources Agency, and yet they are circumventing that requirement of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act in these efforts by bringing it straight to the legislature and utilizing past studies conducted by the Forest Service and BLM to satisfy the need to study the river for its suitability. And frankly, the proposal in the California Wild and Scenic version has extended reaches of the river and consumed greater sections of the river than what the federal suitability designations ever declared.
So the board looks at it that it's not going through the correct process.
Exactly.
Okay. What else did the board bring up, or members that were of the public that were speaking?
Well, the meeting started off allowing the Foothill Conservancy to make a presentation to the board, to all the members of the audience, and they made their presentation, PowerPoint presentation, sort of their ongoing talking points about what Wild and Scenic Designation does and does not do on the Mokelumne. And then the meeting morphed from there into a host of members of the public and board members challenging some of the statements, misstatements, inaccuracies, any number of things that were made in that presentation on Wild and Scenic. And there were a host of folks. Well, one of the big property owners on the Mokelumne River is the Roaring Camp family, and it brings thousands of tourists to our area to participate in activities on the river year after year after year. Well, one of the presentations of the Foothill Conservancy Group was that they went out of their way to protect the interests of the family of Roaring Camp on the river, and one of the family members chose to get up and say, I don't feel very protected here, and went on to elaborate as to why they are concerned with this designation, how it affects their mining claims up and down the river, the access of the public to those mining claims and to utilize those mining claims. And in the end said, we do not support this designation as one of the primary property owners along the river. So misstatements and misrepresentations were challenged repeatedly by a host of folks, whether those misstatements were folks challenging based on a reading of the language of the Wild and Scenic Act. There's specific language in there. I touched on some of it about the Secretary of Resources having to make this suitability determination. It says that they shall study that. They haven't studied it. They're going forward with the legislation. It says that within that study, that secretary is allowed to make recommendations for additional land use regulations on property along those stretches of the river. That's Amador County's jurisdiction, land use regulations, not an appointed secretary at the state level. But that's what the language says. They said that it protects people from eminent domain proceedings for the construction of a new dam, and yet there are also eminent domain proceedings allowed for other items of public beneficial use. You and I have had that discussion before, and they are not excluded in the Wild and Scenic Act. It just says that nobody will be subject to eminent domain without just compensation. Well, that's what eminent domain is taking of your land with just compensation, condemnation.
Okay, well, it seems that I hear from you a lot that there hasn't been enough time looking at this from the state level. We have had studies and looking at this and people weighing in about how this would work at the federal level, but not at the state level. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are, Tom. And that was one of the points made by Supervisor Boitano yesterday, was at the very least we would request that Senator Lonnie Hancock pull this legislation from session right now and give us adequate time to express our concerns with it and potentially work something out. But that's not the fast-tracked sort of backdoor strategy that they've employed to this point. So,
prior to this, would it be a normal procedure for, say, Senator Hancock to have contacted Amador County and see how they felt, or not?
One would hope, Tom. You know, I mentioned that there seems to be that deference to protocol at the federal level, but here at the state, we've got a senator from Oakland telling us that she wants to sponsor a bill that affects the river in Amador and Calaveras counties.
And I guess the point that I was trying to make, that it seemed like that it was favoring possibly the East Bay mud for the water and the use of the water, possibly now and in the future. I mean, but we don't use it. Goes downstream.
Exactly. And that could be the end goal. I mean, on the one hand, we're told to fear East Bay mud because they may have some distant plan for a dam upstream on our river. None in place at this time, but it's something to fear. But in the meantime, it eliminates all of Amador County's opportunities to utilize the river water in our county before it flows on to the benefit of East Bay mud.
So would that lock us into what our allotment is today?
Yes. It doesn't affect existing water rights, but it prevents any new dams, diversion points, a whole host of other infrastructure improvements that could be on the Mokelumne, consistent with what the water agency is doing with the gravity supply line. They're taking water Amador's water right out of the river at a different point than they have in the past. How could a wild and scenic designation possibly impact that? Now, they're taking it out of an existing impound facility on the river, but what if you wanted to take it out of a different location on the river?
Okay, John, quickly, if we could, other than what the board, I guess, is probably taken a vote, drafted a letter, something like
In
that?
the process of drafting a letter to address all of the points that were brought up at
Will
yesterday's
any board
meeting.
members be allowed to speak at the committee meeting?
We plan on it,
Okay.
yes. Yes, we
And
plan
so-
on that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, in looking at this, since this is affecting the future, we want to have more time to look at this and put it through the right process, or get all the process that is due.
And we'd like to have some deference paid to the locally elected officials that represent this region.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Those
John,
are-
thanks for coming by.
Those are the
and,
people's representatives, right,
and-
Tom?
I believe a lot of people voted for you, John. Yeah, a lot of people voted for the Board of Supervisors we have now. All right, thanks for coming by and watching TSPN. There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN.